The Fort Peck Indian Reservation is near Fort Peck, Montana. It is the homeland of the Assiniboine and Sioux tribes of Native Americans. It is the 9th largest Indian reservation in the United States and comprises parts of 4 counties. In descending order of land area, they are Roosevelt, Valley, Daniels, and Sheridan counties. The total land area is 2,094,000 acres, and a population of 10,381 in 2000. The largest community on the reservation is the city of Wolf Point. History. In 1878, the Fort Peck Agency was relocated to its present-day location in Poplar because the original agency was located on a floodplain, suffering floods each spring. Attempts by the U.S. government to take the Black Hills and bind the Sioux to agencies along the Missouri in the 1860s resulted in warfare, reopening the issues that had been central to Red Cloud's War of 1866–68. As part of the Sioux agreed to come into agencies, part chose to resist. Army efforts to bring in the other Sioux led to battles in the Rosebud country, and culminated in the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876. As the victors dispersed, Sitting Bull led followers north into the Redwater country, where contact with the Sioux Fort Peck Agency kept the hunk papas and assorted Tetons supplied. When military pressure increased, Sitting Bull led most of his followers into Canada in 1877. The military presence increased in an effort to induce Sitting Bull to surrender. Camp Poplar was established in 1880. Finally, without supplies and barely tolerated by natives in the area of present-day southern Saskatchewan, Sitting Bull came in to surrender at Fort Buford on July 19, 1881. Some of his hunk papa stragglers intermarried with others at Fort Peck and resided in the Chelsea community. The early 1880s brought many changes and much suffering. By 1881, all the American bison were gone from the region. By 1883, over 300 Assiniboines died of starvation at the Wolf Point sub-agency when medical attention and food were in short supply. Rations were not sufficient for needs, and suffering reservation-wide was exacerbated by particularly severe winters. The early reservation traumas were complicated by frequent changes in agents, few improvements in services, and a difficult existence for the agency tribes. Negotiations during the winter of 1886–87 and ratified in the Act of May 1, 1888, established modern boundaries. Also in 1887, Congress passed the Dawes Act, which provided the general legislation for dividing the hitherto tribally owned Indian reservations into parcels of land to be given to individuals. Around the start of the 20th century, as the non-Indian proceeded to inhabit the boundary areas of the reservation, the prime grazing and farmland areas situated within the reservation drew their attention. As more and more homesteaders moved into the surrounding area, pressure was placed on Congress to open up the Fort Peck Reservation to homesteading. Finally, the Congressional Act of May 30, 1908, commonly known as the Fort Peck Allotment Act, was passed. The act called for the survey and allotment of lands now embraced by the Fort Peck Indian Reservation and the sale and dispersal of all the surplus lands after allotment. Each eligible Indian was to receive 320 acres of grazing land in addition to some timber and irrigable land. Parcels of land were also withheld for agency, school and church use. Also, land was reserved for use by the Great Northern Railroad. All lands not allotted or reserved were declared surplus and were ready to be disposed of under the general provisions of the Homestead, Desert Land, Mineral and Town Site laws. In 1913, approximately 1,348,408 acres of unallotted or tribal unreserved lands were available for settlement by the non-Indian homesteaders, although provisions were made to sell the remaining land not disposed of in the first 5 years. It was never completed. Several additional allotments were made before the 1930s. Educational history on the reservation includes a government boarding school program which was begun in 1877 and finally discontinued in the 1920s. Missionary schools were run periodically by the Mormons and Presbyterians in the first decades of the 20th century, but with minimal success. The Fort Peck Reservation is served by 5 public school districts, which are responsible for elementary and secondary education. In addition, an independent post-secondary institution is located on the reservation, Fort Peck Community College, which offers 9 Associate of Arts, 6 Associate of Science, and 10 Associate of Applied Science degrees. Fort Peck Reservation is home to 2 separate Indian nations, each composed of numerous bands and divisions. The Sioux divisions of Sistan, Wahpetins, the Yanktonais, and the Teton-Hunk-Papa are all represented. The Assiniboine bands of Canoe Paddler and Red Bottom are represented. The reservation is located in the extreme northeast corner of Montana on the north side of the Missouri River. The reservation is 110 miles long and 40 miles wide, encompassing 209,331 acres. Of this, approximately 378,000 acres are tribally owned and 548,000 acres are individually allotted Indian lands. The total of Indian-owned lands is about 926,000 acres. There are an estimated 10,000 enrolled tribal members, of whom approximately 6,000 reside on or near the reservation. The population density is greatest along the southern border of the reservation near the Missouri River and the major transportation routes, U.S. Highway 2 and the Amtrak routing on the tracks of the Burlington Northern Railroad. The Fort Peck tribes adopted the first written constitution in 1927. The tribes voted to reject a new constitution under the Indian Reorganization Act in 1934. The original constitution was amended in 1952, and completely rewritten and adopted in 1960. The present constitution remains one of the few modern tribal constitutions that still includes provisions for general councils, the traditional tribal type of government. The official governing body of the Fort Peck tribes is the Tribal Executive Board, composed of 12 voting members, plus a chairman, vice-chairman, secretary-accountant, and sergeant-at-arms. All members of the governing body, except the secretary-accountant, are elected at large every 2 years. Peoples and sovereignty. The tribal government has control over most activities inside of the reservation borders. The tribe has its own court system, jail, and treatment center. In addition to the tribal government, there are also city and county governments, as well as a newly formed Sistan-Wahpet and Sioux Council. The tribal headquarters are located in Poplar, widely viewed as the capital of the reservation. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has the Fort Peck Agency located in Poplar. The reservation is home to the Assiniboine and Sioux tribes. Though separate, both tribes have similar-sounding languages and are of the Siouan language family. The Fort Peck tribes have an estimated 11,000 enrolled members, half of which reside on the reservation. There are also many associate members, meaning they have Indian blood but not enough to be enrolled with the tribe. To be enrolled, or recognized as an official tribal member, a person must be at least 1/4 Fort Peck Indian blood. This is done through blood quantum measurements kept by the tribe. The Fort Peck tribes is the largest employer on the reservation and in the region, with over 350 employees. Big game hunting on the reservation is limited to enrolled tribal members only. Upland bird seasons are open to the general public. Bison. In March 2012, 63 American bison from Yellowstone National Park were transferred to the Fort Peck Indian Reservation Prairie, to be released to a 2,100-acre game preserve 25 miles north of Poplar. There are many other bison herds outside Yellowstone, but this is one of the very few genetically pure ones, not crossbred with cattle. Native Americans celebrated the move, which came over a century after bison were nearly wiped out by hunters and the government. The Assiniboine and Sioux tribes at the Fort Peck Indian Reservation will also receive a portion of this herd. Communities: Brockton, Fraser, Luster, Poplar, Reserve, Wolf Point. Notable tribal members: Dolly Akers, legislator; Chaska Spencer, Minnie Sioux, journalist, activist, co-founder of the Native American Press Association; Frank W. Warner, Horses Ghost.